Hello everyone, Prince Dabsalot here. I am going to be talking today about how to run the Mothership Scenario Bones and Videotapes found in the excellent Hull Breach Compendium. So, let's hop right into it. So full disclosure at the start of this video, I did not run this scenario. I was actually given the opportunity to be a player in this scenario, which definitely revealed some interesting things to me about the way Mothership feels from a player perspective. So first and foremost, general tip, if you find yourself wardening or GMing or whatever all the time, definitely if you can, try and encourage one of your players or find a local group or something to just be a player, because it taught me a ton just about how it feels to be sitting on the other side. Not the perfect scenario in my head. I had some issues with it, but I think we can do a lot to fix it, and I think we can do a lot to make it really, really interesting. So that being said, I don't actually think the scenario is bad. I think it's pretty interesting, but I made a character, and I went in expecting something more Mothership-y when honestly something like this is a little more Morkborg-y to me. I know it's kind of a very niche nerd difference, but if you're a niche nerd, which you are by playing this and watching this, you're going to know there's some key differences between what I see as like a classic dungeon crawl and a system that's made for dungeon crawls, and what I see and what I expect from the usual Mothership game. And this was very much a dungeon crawl, which isn't a bad thing, but I just wish I would have been a little more prepared or knowledgeable walking into that, which we'll have an entire section of this video just discussing players and what I learned from being a player, but we'll hop right into the scenario. So this scenario took us 2 sessions to play, some pretty decently long sessions too, probably like 3.5 hours to get through, and out of our crew of 4, 2 died, so, make of that what you will. It was a decent little murder dungeon, and yes, I was the one that died, so maybe I am being a little salty, but yes, very tough scenario, tricky, and very easy to get lost. So given that your PCs are very likely to die in this scenario, I would definitely have, as suggested in the beginning, 1 or maybe even 2 of the science team that previously went in before them made as a character sheet ready to go. So there's no hemming and hawing or no sitting there waiting for a person to roll up this NPC. Just have them ready to rip. Make them, give them biology, give them stuff that would make them interesting. Maybe write a few key details about them. And I would even have, like I said, 2 ready to go so you can hand out, because especially given the drop upon entering this scenario, with a failure, which is fairly common because PCs are more likely to fail than not when they roll in Mothership, you're taking 1d10 damage, which sets off this kind of chain cascading reaction in this scenario, because this scenario is not afraid of pumping on damage into your PCs. Another thing I also thought was interesting is that it drops your PCs 15 meters, and this is probably a thing so that may not matter in your games, depends on how explicit you are with distances. 15 meters is what, about 50 feet. So your PC, in reality, if you drop 50 feet, you're probably going to die. Certainly not just take 1d10 damage. So I would recommend being pretty nebulous about the sizes. I list off a few exact sizes in this thing, much like the crawl space. And that's what, like a foot and a half. That's super tight. That's super tight, kind of pushing reality to have someone shove through that. Because I'm a skinny dude, and I don't know if I could squeeze in a foot triangular space. So I would be just very nebulous when you're describing distances to your PCs as far as like the falling and the size of the thing, and just say, oh, you can squeeze through, and not worry about exact distances, because our DM brought that up at the table, and we're like, huh? That seems awfully tight. But yeah, have a few those NPCs ready to go so your PCs don't feel too bad when they die in the initial encounter or two, and then have to worry about sitting there rolling up another PC, especially if you're playing with some new people like we were, who weren't used. I know used to rolling up new characters. I know Mothership has a pretty quick character generation, but it still requires. You would be impressed at the amount of hand-holding that's still needed for some players. So yep, recommended. Have those NPCs ready to roll up, ready to play as player characters. So given that this scenario is fairly bare bones description-wise, like most Mothership scenarios, so that's not a knock against the scenario, I would highly recommend reading this Essence of Dread in the Mothership, in the same Hull Breach compendium, because this has some great points for what you can do with the sights, the smells, the sounds of this underground cavern, because sometimes it felt a little dry when we were running through it, just from the lack of description that we kind of had to pull out. And I really think if you're going to make this a scary dungeon, it deserves some additional sounds, some additional sights, whatever you can squeeze out of your players. Because the example of like, oh, you walk through a haunted mine and you make your save, so you're fine, you just walk through. Like, that's not particularly inspiring or particularly shocking versus describing these winding maze of tunnels that stretches on and on. So you could really go far by reading this and taking some of the notes and even writing some notes for yourself about the descriptions you're going to use from place to place, because stuff like that will cement in your players' minds where they are, because it's very, very easy to get turned around in this scenario. Another thing I would definitely do in this scenario is give your players this map. My Warden chose not to make us feel more lost, and man, did that succeed. I had a pretty solid player map that I drew throughout the thing, but once everyone started teleporting and we ended up in the reservoir, I completely lost it. Maybe that's a skill issue. Maybe that's something like that. I need to look into taking better maps. But I thought I did pretty solid. And as soon as the sides came out and the symbols and stuff, when I found this later in the handout files digitally, this would have been a huge game changer in my enjoyment of this scenario. Just the ability to track more accurately where we were and how to accomplish this, because it made the portals and the way they worked a mystery versus the unlocking and how they connected, which I think is really where the juice is, and how your players need to go about it. We spent way too long just trying to coordinate and track down exactly where we were in this structure, which again might be a skill issue, but I definitely would recommend giving something like this to your players, which is included for a reason in the handouts, because it will just improve the player experience. I would also recommend, as the Warden, having this physical map printed out in front of you, and use those cubes I demonstrated in my other videos to lay out exactly where your player characters are. So it's way easier to track for yourself, because there was a lot of flipping back and forth between the map and figuring out exactly where the players were and how to read that out. I just noticed as a player, and that might, if someone's been wardening forever, this might not be an issue, but if I was wardening this, I would absolutely have this map laid out in front of me so I could, on the fly, recognize exactly where player characters are. And I would honestly have them do the same thing with the player map if they mapped it out really well. So with the lens tapes, players find the tapes in the listed order, and I would ignore rolling for drop rates. I would just see these in great moments of tension when it matters. I wouldn't worry about too much about where they're placed beforehand or rolling to see if they spawn. I would just use your general intuition to have your PC stumble across these, because they're not huge for unveiling the mystery. They're good, and they definitely taught us about the vines and stuff like that, but a lot of them are just good, creepy stuff that's happening to this previous team of them being murdered and dragged and killed by these skeletons. So they're a good source of horror, and they deserve to just be inserted exactly when it's going to make your PCs the most paranoid. So don't roll for them, don't do anything like that. Just put them in when you think they're good. And this tip also applies to the other videos that can be found relating to the overall lore of Mothership. So much like these other cassette tapes with the Vibe references and stuff like that, just stick those in interchangeably between to really throw your players off, and I think that could be great at hinting at some future or past adventures. I would toss all of these in because they are all great, and all of these are really fun adventures to run too. So you want to keep your PCs not only looking forward to the current Mothership thing, but always looking to the future for your next Mothership thing, and these are a great way to do it. And so I'm so happy they were included by the author. Props. One thing my Warden really succeeded at, that was making these skeletons a constant threat. That's what you should do. They shouldn't be too aggressive or too pressing, but they should always exist in the back of your players' minds as a pressure point. Obviously, once they grab the thing and they all get active and aggressive, that's another story. But even prior to that, they should just be this constant weird presence that your players always kind of see or know are around, because that's exactly what our Warden did, and it kept us moving. It split us up, which also definitely split the party with this one if you can, because that was great, but make sure you keep the transitions snappy in between, because sometimes when we were split, there were moments of 20 minutes even of us not interacting with each other, or one group getting a spotlight, other group not, and it just led to kind of a drag for us that were sitting there, especially because we were trying not to take notes or metagame for what our other party is doing. So definitely keep that snappy if you're going to split the party. But yeah, if they do split, it's a great source of pressure, and it's really awesome to see the dual pathways that everyone can take through this dungeon. So don't be afraid of that, and yes, keep these skeletons constant and vaguely threatening. So now I'm going to get into some general thoughts on being a player in Mothership as my first time being a player. Pretty incredible experience just being able to be a player and to have one of my usual players be a warden. Like, that was just really neat, and it really led to an appreciation of both sides of the table. Because sometimes I'd warden, you can get a little stuck in your head as a forever DM of being this master storyteller or whatever the heck you want to call yourself, and not appreciate the work that goes into the players and pushing the story forward and being interesting narratively and, always engaging in these sometimes a little bit contrived plot hooks and stuff. So remember to thank your players, and definitely try being a player sometime. It's really cool. I also didn't realize, I did know, maybe inkling in the back of my head, but how punishing being a player is in Mothership. Most roles suck, and this game has a really tough cascading death spiral system. I play a lot of horror games with some death spirals, Delta Green being the main one, but Mothership can screw you over when you just start doing a little bit bad. You go from doing a little poorly to a lot poorly to all of a sudden you're dead. Which sometimes what feels like to me not a ton of narrative control. It's just kind of what I used to think was like a slow tap is just a pressure blast. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it is something to keep in mind, especially when you're calling for rolls. When scenarios ask for a lot of rolls, much like in the Bones and Videotapes, I would even say if a player is accomplished moving past an obstacle once, they even get advantage on it or something, because a lot of systems make you feel kind of bad for missing rolls. Mothership really beats you down for just not rolling. And not rolling well is very easy to do when you have maybe 30 in a stat and you have to roll under that. So that's my first thought. So another thought I had when I was playing is how important team comp and team tone are to Mothership. Because personally, I was walking into this thing as a Marine, hardened Marine, with this big old backstory about a home planet being destroyed and losing a war, stuff I was planning to, reveal through this narrative scenario and have some backstory about losing my previous squad and how this squad's going to make it through. And then my other teammate was playing a silly android that was always so cheery. And that isn't anyone's fault, but it just led to some friction in the game that shouldn't have existed. And I think that just speaks to the importance of having, it doesn't need to be a whole session 0, but just a small discussion beforehand about what do you as players want out of this. If everyone wants to be like a little more lighthearted and tonally and not take everything super seriously, then that's totally okay. Mothership doesn't always have to be this super serious dour experience. But that also isn't bad either if you want to run like a hardened squad that's here to get out alive. But that tonal difference was more than I expected, and definitely impacted my player experience when I was trying to take it seriously and make it out of this thing alive. And I had 2 other very silly players on my team that were just kind of free falling through the thing, which in the end, one of them survived. So what the hell do I know? I died. But that's definitely just something to keep in mind as a warden and as a fellow player. And the warden should just bring it up, but it's really on the players to communicate that, which we didn't do, and make sure we're on the same page as far as group tone. Because, yeah, like I said, that affected my experience, and I'm going to think about that going forward and trying to communicate that. And if we just had that in the beginning about talking about what do we want out of this, it would have eliminated that entirely. And it brought in some frustrations that, again, shouldn't have existed, slightly impacted the play experience. So that's just something to keep in mind as a player that I never thought about before until I was a player and I saw the way it happened. I would also make an effort as a warden after I was a player of letting your players know about the vibes of whatever scenario you're walking into, especially if it involves, fresh characters coming from nothing, coming together, and making sure, like, if I would have known this one was a little bit more of like a Morkborg murder dungeon experience, I maybe wouldn't have spent so much time making a whole PC backstory and prepping to interact with verbal NPCs and stuff if there really were none. So just a little bit of heads up on what I should have experienced walking into this would have gone a long way with making me feel better about the kind of character I was committing to this and what I should have expected. I'm not talking spoiler stuff. I'm just saying, oh yeah, by the way, this is a dungeon. Don't expect a lot of talking. Or, hey, this is a intrigue-heavy scenario. Expect a lot of talking. And just little tidbits like that can go a super long way in improving your player's experience in a game like this. So one last thing I also did as a player that I really, really liked, and I'm going to continue to do going forward, maybe even do for my players or whatever, is I made little item cards of what items I have and what they do. So it was super easy to hand over to my DM or my co-players and just explain, this is what this does. It is a highly advanced set of tools meant for hacking basic airlock electronic door systems. Boom. So there was no, hey, can I see that? Can I see this book again? Can I look at this chart again and see what I have to do for the 100th time? Nope. I just had it right out in front of me. It was super, super nice, super fun. And I love a good handout, and it let me feel like a real Marine with all my tools set out. Not that it really came in handy very much in the scenario, but the idea was there, and it just sped up gameplay a lot. So would absolutely recommend, if you got the time, just making one of these. I actually just took photos from like Home Depot, black and white of them, and then applied a pixelation filter across it. Worked totally fine. Fit the Mothership style completely. So, and that's it for Bones and Videotapes. Despite my little bit of issues with this scenario, I still thought it was pretty good, and I'll play it again if given the chance, or run it myself. If you're looking for a kind of Morkborgian, fun murder dungeon with some good, light puzzle elements, this is definitely one for you. I liked the idea of finding the creepy videotapes around. I wish we found more as a player, and if I'm a DM, I'm definitely going to be pretty liberal handing those out because I love the idea of tracking behind a murdered science team. Nothing better than the horror characters finding a creepy videotape, telling them exactly what's going to happen to them in a few hours. So definitely give this one a shot. I give it a solid thumbs up. And thanks, everyone. See you next time.